Hello guys, welcome to A2 Sports History Screencast. Tonight's focus is going to be on 19th century English public schools. We're going to move from characteristics of public schools, which we did last lesson, which focused on those specific characteristics that made the 19th century English public schools unique. So we looked at kind of how the acronym BABI Sting linked to those characteristics, and we looked to see if we could translate that. It might be a little task for you to do now. Can you remember what that Babis thing stood for, and can you give some characteristics that makes the 19th century English public schools unique? Now, what we're going to do now is look at how the English public schools changed through the times, and luckily for you, it kind of links to the kind of societal changes. So, stage one would be popular recreation, so pre-industrial revolution. Stage two starts to look at kind of the Industrial Revolution, and post that, which will be rational recreation, as well as stage three. So these two look a little bit further ahead when it becomes a little bit more developed. This one is very primitive in terms of the activities and the facilities that we use. So if I just go on from there, then you've got a key focus we're going to look at throughout the next things. This is wrong up here, so that should not be stage two, it should be stage one. So if we just look down here, you've got 6 variables. These 6 variables, we have to be able to answer them in relation to the early parts of public school development. And if you can look here, we've got these: nature of games, status of games, organisation of games, technical development, social relationships, values. You need to be able to answer these about the early stages of public schools. So it's called bullying and brutality as a stage. Okay, so the bullying and brutality focuses on the following. So basically, first bit, nature of games. Okay, so nature of games in public schools for bullying and brutality refers to this kind of translation term. So nature of games, with that bullying and brutality, referred to institutionalized popular recreation, because it was very similar to like that kind of popular recreation, but it was in an institution, which in this case is a school. Okay, so this reflected the harshness of society both in school and out of school at that period in time. So we're looking at pre-1800s. Now, activities they played ranged. So you could have from childlike, so things that were just fun-based, to barbaric, which could be extremely aggressive. So some examples of stuff there: you had fist fights, hoops, mob football, trespassing. There was lots of different activities the kids would do due to the kind of the land or the kind of grounds that surrounded the school. Going on from there, then, status of games. Now, the status of games, when we're talking about this stuff, we have to think about 2 people here. So 2 sets of kind of people. We're looking at both the students, or the boys, and also the staff. So if I said to you very quickly now, what are we focused on? So status of games, the boys had held games in very high esteem, so they were high status, okay, because obviously it was a chance for them to go and do what they wanted to do. However, the masters had no interest in games, so the teachers had no interest whatsoever. The only focus was to rule with an iron rod in the classroom, okay, but have no interest in them outside the classroom. They were simply paid to teach the students, and as soon as they left that lesson, that was it. They did not want to know. So if you can see how games still had a long way to go before kind of like sport in public schools was going to be really kind of developed, because at the moment it was only the kids who liked doing it, and they had no support from the teachers. That's what you need to know on that section there. Going on then, organisation of games. Now, organisation of games, we can't talk about the masters or staff here because they have no input into the organisation of games. What we can talk about is how organisation of games was specifically based around the boys organising for the boys. Okay, so that basically meant that activities were often informal and unplanned. So what you had was you'd put whichever boys were around at the time, they'd have pick-up type games, they'd have their own specific games, and they would just play amongst each other. But it'd be informal, unplanned. Anything that's on this right-hand side has to be in your answer. Technical developments. Okay, so the technical developments refer to the stage that we're in, which is stage 1, first stage of public schools, bullying and brutality, and we're looking at the rules and facilities at that point for activities that were taken part in. Now, the facilities were often simple and natural. For example, you'd have a pond for swimming. You wouldn't have a swimming pool, it would be a pond, because it would be before these kind of technical developments such as swimming pools came in. And then we'd have a look at things such as, like, you might have a grass area that they use for kind of their variations of football. Now, the rules at this stage were specifically linked to something called the Melting Pot 1. Okay, so Melting Pot 1 was the first kind of, I suppose, start point for rules within sport. And what it was is basically you'd have lots of different students come into the private schools from different prep schools that were non-local, as we talked about in the characteristics. So they would come from places far away, and then when they came to the school, they would actually adapt the regional variations they had and adopt them to form a school sporting culture for their own school. So, for example, they would all have played some kind of kicking or hacking game in, like, aka mob football, in their own little village, but they would have very specific, unique rules. When they came to schools, they would then kind of try and use what they knew from their regional homes, and then try to use what facilities they had at the school to make their own games. For example, the Eton Wall game, where there's a wall, obviously, and they would use the kicking and hacking next to a wall, which I'll show you in the lesson. From there, social relationships. So social relationships refers to the relationships between two sets of people, relationships between masters and boys. And the relationships between masters and boys were non-existent. Okay, they did not have relationships. There was often situations where riots would take place, where students would barricade the teachers in. Okay, and it was not a nice relationship between the boys and the masters. When it comes to the relationship between the boys and the boys in this early stage, because the teachers had such disregard for the students, it was basically left to the kind of the boys to look after themselves. So what happened was you'd have the older boys bullying the younger boys. Now, this system was known as fagging, okay, which referred to unfair punishments dished out. Now, I'm sure you can think of your own translation for fagging, but what we're focused on is kind of unfair punishments, and you can let your own mind run wild with that one. Final bit. Values. What values were gained as a result of stage one bullying and brutality? Now, the main value was that, you had this kind of concept of survival of the fittest. Okay, because the boys organised game for all the boys, if you were fit, if you were strong, if you were kind of someone who could survive, you would be fine. If you weren't, you would be bullied, hence the name bullying and brutality. So just a quick recap then. If you look down here, you've got nature of games, status of games, organisation of games, technical development, social relationships, values. You're going to use these 6 triggers and variables for all 3 stages. So we're going to look at how they progress from here and across. So I'll do that in tomorrow's lesson. Thank you very much.